Good evening, friends. Welcome to the India Power Talk. As you know, India Power Talk is an initiative wherein we invite international thought leaders and domain experts to create an easily accessible digital reservoir of their insights, experiences, and strategies on how to revive Indian economy. This would benefit not just Indian entrepreneurs, but also international business, investors, strategic partners who are part of or intend to invest in India. Everyone is proclaiming the importance of transparency. It's mentioned in the Wall Street Journal almost daily, and we hear it promoted in every quarterly earnings of Fortune 500 companies. Governance or transparency may be easy to explain, could be even easier to articulate, and probably the most used phrases to write any vision or mission statement of any corporation or institution. The most difficult task is to put the same in practice. And I guess is the only reason for the collapse of the best of the top organizations in the last decades. To talk on this subject, today we have the founder of the Transparency Task Force UK, one of the fastest growing and increasingly impactful collaborative campaigning community that encourages the financial services sector to be transparent, truthful, and trustworthy. With over 20 years of work experience, he is spearheading purposeful reformatory change in the global financial ecosystem with over 2,500 strong volunteer members around the world who are organized into subject-specific 14 subgroups. Publisher of the Transparency Times, an online magazine, and recently published book entitled Why We Must Rebuild Trustworthiness and Confidence in Financial Services and How We Can Do It. Let me welcome a truly distinguished Andy Agathangelou, founder of the Transparency Task Force, London, to the India Power Talk. Welcome, Andy. Let me begin by asking you a quick overview on the scope and objectives of the Transparency Task Force.
The Transparency Task Force has a very wide remit. Our mission is to encourage ongoing reform of the financial services sector as a whole so that it serves society better. And what we are doing is basically building an international institution that is dedicated to helping ensure that consumers around the world are being treated properly and fairly by the financial services sector.
What was your original motivation for creating the Transparency Task Force, and how did you really get it off the ground? I mean, what inspired you to work towards ensuring financial transparency? I mean, this is such an abstract subject.
And when I was in my early 20s, on 3 separate occasions, I witnessed conduct that was not very professional. I witnessed things happening in the companies I was working for that was not really good for the customer. And I reported this in the appropriate way to the compliance officers for the companies I was working for. And unfortunately, the response was that they really didn't mind that much about what was going on because it was making a lot of money. And this led me to have quite a tainted view of the quality of the culture within not just the companies I was working for, but perhaps in the financial services sector as a whole. I gradually realized that what was happening as a consequence of the way the financial ecosystem works. It was happening because of the incentives and the pressures and the culture that was at play. But basically the cultures were all about maximizing sales, maximizing revenue, maximizing profit, and it really kind of didn't matter too much to some people where the corners were being cut that would ultimately be at the expense of the customer. And I really was not very comfortable with this at all, and on many occasions I thought about leaving the industry, but I chose not to. I persevered. And as time went by, because I started to have a better understanding of the dynamics at work, including the poor governance within these companies, I decided to give a speech about all this on the 6th of May 2015. I remember it very well. And this speech on the 6th of May 2015 was the first time I really properly articulated the idea that the financial services sector, and in particular the way it is governed, needs to be changed. It needs to be fixed. The speech landed very, very well. I spoke about the idea of improving governance, improving culture, improving leadership, and all these sorts of things. And the speech led to people congregating around the idea of beginning to build a community of people who shared my belief that the finance industry is so important, it has to be properly governed. And one thing led to another. I ran a symposium on the 7th of October 2015, another date I remember very, very well. And after that, Nitin, people came up to me afterwards volunteering to be part of this community, or perhaps even this movement that I was trying to create to bring good people together to help change the system. So that's how it all got off the ground, and it's been a roller coaster ride ever since.
But I guess now your mission is not just restricted to financial service sector, but across the corporate world and also the other institutions and even the governments, I guess.
We're doing a tremendous amount with regulators, with policymakers, with people in governments, with major trade bodies, not just in the UK, but also overseas. In fact, last year, as a result of meetings I ran across Europe, North America, the Far East, and Australia, we are creating TTF International, and we even have TTF India getting off the ground now. So if there are people out there in India that have an interest in helping to fix the reform of the financial services sector, they should get in touch. But our primary focus is financial services. That's where we are targeting our energies.
Let me take you to your book, Why We Must Rebuild Trustworthiness and Confidence in Financial Services, and how we can do it. Can you talk about your book?
The book came about because of the reaction to the meetings I ran last year in Dublin, Amsterdam, London, Zurich, Brussels, Hong Kong, Singapore, Sydney, Melbourne, Washington, DC, Boston, and New York. And the reaction to the idea of people working together to collaboratively reform the system and to try to fix what's wrong with it, the reaction was tremendously positive. There are so many good people out there working in the finance industry who are fed up with the reputational damage that keeps happening. And what basically happened, Nitin, was that at the meetings, I would be sharing my ideas, but also people would be sharing their ideas. And I started to realize that actually there were some brilliant thoughts, some brilliant ideas. So it became quite natural to think about producing a book that would capture all of these ideas. We have 65 highly competent, highly credible individuals who have contributed thought leadership essays for our book.
Could you just share just the one or two very, very key and the common thread which runs across all the commentators on governance?
The key theme running through the suggestions for reform in the governance space is about recognizing that human beings will behave as human beings. And what I mean by that is this: if human beings are incentivized to try to generate the maximum benefit for themselves personally, we should not be surprised that they do that. If people are incentivized to cut corners, they will cut corners. If people are incentivized to take risks, they will take risks. This is ultimately what caused the global financial crisis, as an example. So the theme running through the governance section of the book essentially says, let's be very honest with each other about what human nature is and what human nature does. Let's be honest with each other that if we create weak governance frameworks, there will be a pressure, an incentive, a tendency for people to put profit and self-gratification first and foremost. We therefore need to build robust, solid governance frameworks that make it difficult for people to do the wrong things.
Digital tools can help achieve transparency, efficiency, and also accountability. Could you talk about this?
I really do believe, Nitin, that transparency is brilliantly supported by technology. Technology is a wonderful ally of transparency. What technology can do, for example, reporting through blockchain, what it can do is bring to the surface the truth. Yeah, it can bring to the surface accurate, factual, evidence-based reporting about what is really going on. It can provide organizations with what amounts to dashboards so they can see the key functions in an organization, what is happening. So without a doubt, I think there is a very, very important existing but fast growing market for individuals and entrepreneurs who can develop tech, fintech, to help transparency come to the surface.
So, one of the main advantages, as you mentioned, is not only in the interest of the institution or the community, but also of the country and the global peace. What social impact do you think financial transparency will bring, especially in the underdeveloped or the developing countries?
I think there is a tremendous opportunity for developing nations to leapfrog the mistakes that developed nations have made.
Mhm.
What I mean by that, Nitin, is this. I think there is absolutely no reason why, because of technology, countries that are not as developed today can very quickly accelerate the progress towards transparency and the world of commerce.
Mhm.
So I think that transparency creates a more competitive, open, free market. It therefore enables all countries to compete more fairly. Countries that have an inherently lower cost base are therefore better positioned to compete on the world stage.
What do you really see as the greatest challenges in making what you wish for in the corporate governance space, and maybe in the context of India? And what would it take to overcome them, Andy?
I think that there are some weaknesses in the system worldwide, specifically the audit function. The audit function around the world is being questioned. Why is it that there have been so many large major corporate collapses or large major corporate scams, scandals, fraud, misconduct that apparently has happened under the watch of auditors? Because if you don't have a good audit function, how can you trust what is being reported about those companies? And if you don't have trust, you do not have confidence. If you don't have confidence, then why would you invest into a company that you're not that sure about? When I gave my talk last year about corporate governance at the CFA Institute event in November, which took place in Pune, I had many conversations with people over coffee, over the lunch breaks, etc. And the theme that kept coming up time and time again was that India seems to be impacted by fraud and corruption. And this is a problem for everybody. It's a problem for everybody in India because if an outside investing country wants to consider in what parts of the world do we want to invest, they cannot be as confident about investing in a country that has a reputation for fraud, corruption, etc. If I was an entrepreneur, I will build an organization that is immaculate in terms of reputation, that has robust governance, that is very, very transparent. I would make sure that my reporting was totally accurate and on time. I would make sure that my organization built a culture where thoughts about fraud and corruption would be absolutely taboo. And I would build a company that would stand out from the crowd as being a highly reputable, safe, solid, credible entity. Companies that are safe and sound are exactly the kind of companies that people want to invest into. Transparency, truthfulness, and trustworthiness are all commercial virtues. If you're going to build something, build it properly, build it on solid foundations with good ethics, good standards, good leadership. It will last a long time. It will make sustainable profits healthily with very, very low risk.
Andy, globally, there are billions of small, medium, and startup enterprises, which includes around 6.5 million in India. And which will grow, I guess, because of pandemic. There are a lot of layoffs and people have lost jobs, so they all would join the bandwagon of startups, I guess, or some kind of SME or MSME segment. Now, these companies are hungry of capital and technology. What would be your message to them for survival and growth? I recollect last time you mentioned that there is a lot of opportunity for these companies to be financially transparent and really build their brand around the transparency and governance.
The harsh reality is this. Unless you're particularly creative and unless you have found something new to take to the market, it's very likely that all of those aspiring entrepreneurs are going to be competing in competitive markets.
Yes.
Where, when all is said and done, the difference between their product and their competitor's product is probably not very much. The difference between their service and their competitor's service is not very much either. So you then ask yourselves, around what sorts of things can you truly differentiate? And you can differentiate in terms of the culture of the organization. You can differentiate in terms of the ethics and the integrity and the leadership and the authenticity and the governance and the vision and the belief within the organization.
I see. Last time, I recollect during the discussion, and you did mention to me about the two-tier board structure, and you did made a reference of your friend from Australia. Could you elaborate that for our audience?
Of course, firstly, I'll tell you about my friend in Australia, Dr. Shan Turnbull. He's a great character. Dr. Shan Turnbull has spent his entire life really investigating and understanding and researching the topic of corporate governance. He's a great man to talk to. Dr. Shan Turnbull spoke extensively about the idea of empowering stakeholders, and empowering customers, empowering the community, empowering society at large, and trying to create a more balanced perspective. And to keep it very simple, one of the approaches, of course, is to have a two groups of people running the organization. One group focusing on commercial priorities, in other words, maximizing profit,
Yes.
making the business a success commercially, and the other group making sure that the organization is run within a very tight governance framework to keep it out of trouble, to make sure it doesn't get fined, that it doesn't produce bad products, bad services. And having these two groups working collaboratively creates the kind of balance that's necessary, and it becomes a naturally self-regulating mechanism. The tension between the two groups creates harmony and balance. If you take one of those groups away, it is very obvious that you will end up developing the kind of company that simply puts profit above everything else, and ultimately pays a very big price for it.
And just the one thing that can be implemented to improve the corporate, the financial transparency or the corporate governance.
I would most definitely say that the really cute, intelligent thing for organizations to do is to make the purpose of the organization clear, and to make sure the purpose of the organization is more than and bigger than simply profit. Organizations that have a clear mission-led purpose are the kinds of organizations that are going to thrive and survive virtually regardless of the challenges of the market.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much indeed, Nitin. Thank you.